me tell you about a friend. It's Craig LeBlanc where the good times never end. Talking Parks and Rec, it's a show you gotta know. Welcome one and all to the Daily Parks and Rec Show. It's the Daily Parks and Rec Show.
You're changing everything about the environment, so the core need for more trees gets greater and greater. For every bit of square footage of concrete that you put down, you need to try to mitigate it with a tree canopy that's covering that concrete to slow down some of this heat. So I think that's where the urban canopy is huge, and I think we lose more than we put down every year. So it becomes a growing problem. It's a problem whenever you talk about these larger cities.
Welcome to the Daily Parks and Recreation Show. Today, we're bringing you the future of facility maintenance, from smart cities and IoT technology to robotic lawnmowers that take the grunt work out of park care. We'll dive into how these innovations are saving time, money, and resources, all while making our parks more sustainable. Get ready to learn how smart technology is changing the game in park management and keeping our communities thriving. Let's jump in. All right, this is Craig LeBlanc, the doorman, your host of the Daily Parks and Rec Show. Oh, hold on, I got to change my title. I've got it still set. Let's see, headline. Oh, no, wait, that's your headline. Let me change mine. Headline. We're just going to call it, let me just put urban forestry. There we go. All right. So special guest, second time on the show, Garrett James, as we try to launch and provide value to the facilities maintenance. We found a topic that it's just keeps coming up over and over and over again. It's this urban forestry. Garrett, maybe you can just give a basic definition of what is urban forestry. What are we thinking about with that?
So the best example that I've got, and thanks again for having me on for a second round.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming.
Best example I've got is especially whenever, for my region, whenever you get out of these smaller towns and you get into these cities to where you start outnumbering fields with concrete. You're changing your overall watershed. You're changing everything about the environment. So the core need for more trees gets greater and greater. For every bit of square footage of concrete that you put down, you need to try to mitigate it with a tree canopy that's covering that concrete to slow down some of this heat. So I think that's where the urban canopy is huge. And I think we lose more than we put down every year. So it becomes a growing problem. And it really is. It's a problem whenever you talk about these larger cities. And what I thought was so crazy whenever we started looking into all this info to try to figure out what is the leading cause of these heat island effects that are hitting all these cities. And you could see these drastic climate changes, especially when you get to somewhere like Dallas, where it is just an urban jungle. There's buildings where there should be trees. And one of the biggest effects that I thought was crazy was AC units on these big buildings. They are pumping all of this air don't get me wrong, it's our hot air that we're breathing out. Right. They're pumping it out of these buildings and it's just sending it right back into the atmosphere. So it's added heat that's not just from the sun collecting on the sidewalks and the streets everywhere in between, but it's the cars driving around. It's just that mass collection of everybody in one spot at one time, just overloading what their normal environment could handle.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you think of all the electricity that's generated, well, this is actually good because you work for a power company, but you've got all this massive power at the megawatt scale, even the gigawatt scale, that's pumping electricity into these inner cities. And then they convert that to heat, which is just pumped out into the local atmosphere. And then this concrete jungle and rooftops are further exacerbating the problem. And and there's not enough like green fields to compensate for this. But this is where trees can come in and actually have a small entry point into the earth, and then just push out this massive canopy that can aid in this. But maybe talk about the heat island effect. Where does that term come from?
I would be lying to you if I can tell you exactly where that term came from, but in the aspect of it, you could see it whenever you're looking at a thermal map,
Yeah.
because you can see these inner cities to where it's all of a sudden you got this hot spot, you got this island of heat that's coming out of this one area. Especially in Texas, we just have a few big cities, and everything around them is still smaller and not so developed. So you'll just see on this thermal map this big flare up, and you're like, whenever you're looking at it from a space view, you're like, whoa, what is going on there? And then you zoom in, you're like, oh, that's Dallas. Oh, that's Houston. Oh, that's here. So it's like, it really is. You get those heat islands that are building up all of this thermal energy and expanding it out from there. And then it teeters off, and you get areas like my usual drive to work used to be crossing the lakes. And you could see, just driving in your car, just look up and you can watch it as you're leaving that metroplex. You're just tink, tink, tink. You're going down the line and you're just teetering off. And then you'll get over a lake and you'll see a thermal change right there. You hit a valley or a dip and you get a thermal change right there. So it all plays into it, and water, trees, I mean, your airflow, everything does.
Yeah. And really, if you look at the public spaces, you've got the roads. Obviously, you can't plant a tree or grass in the road, so that's off limits. You've got a rooftop. Can't really plant a tree or grass on top of your roof.
You can.
I guess that's
There's
true.
a way, but it takes time and money, but there's a way.
Yeah. But then you've got these kind of green spaces. A lot of times they're just mediums in the middle of the road or right around the sidewalk, or that green space between like the road and where the building starts. You've got an opportunity to set a tree that can really, I wonder if there's any science behind how much heat does a tree take away from the area it's planted in if it's all surrounded by concrete and stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I wish I still had my old maps. We were doing some amazing work with the Texas Trees Foundation. They had just amazing maps on how everything was being affected and where it was the worst. I mean, we were going through and specifically picking streets that were the worst cases of heat in that area, and what streets already had trees, what streets didn't have trees, what type of tree was in that area, if that tree was even helping in the effectiveness of blocking out sunlight to the ground level. Because it wasn't as much about just planting the tree as planting the correct tree. Because there's a lot of trees that in that environment, they may work well 50 miles away, but since they're in the middle of that concrete and they're getting all that external heat, that tree may burn up in that location. So a tree that's hardy enough. And at the end of the day, you get the people who want a tree that's pretty enough that even though it may be the right tree, it's not the right tree for them.
Yeah.
So it may do the job, but it's not pretty.
I can tell you, if you go to, I live blocks from LSU campus and also in New Orleans, it's got to be these live oaks are just massive. The area they can cover, and how far they reach out from their trunk.
And the time it took to grow those. I mean, those trees are old as time. And it's awesome to see that. I think colleges do a really good job about tree mitigation, keeping the trees on campus and making sure that they're healthy and pruned correctly. And I love to see it. College campuses, I don't know why, but I feel like they always have great tree programs because you want that old established look of a tree on your campus. So it's hard to get there, so you don't want to lose the ones you got.
Right.
We were driving by a small airport on the way to my mother-in-law's yesterday for Easter, and I said the same thing. I looked over and I was like, look at those live oaks on that property. Those suckers are 3 foot across, every one of them. It's like they were massive, and they were all pruned correctly, and they had the correct spacing. And I was like, somebody has gone in and they planned that. They've known this is what we need to do. So somebody took the forethought into it and saying, hey, we need to keep these trees. We need to keep them correctly.
Yeah, I know the ones around me it's nothing to see a 200-year-old 5, 6, 7 foot across at the trunk tree, and they are just flourishing. But I mean, it does take a lot of, I think the one ingredient they have to have is time. And
Mhm.
if you're constantly, in the residential areas, or in the private, in the private land, you change ownership so frequently that only really the community property, the public property, can guarantee this is going to remain a safe place for this
Mhm.
tree for 200 years. Most
Oh
most
yeah.
private land doesn't have a 200-year single owner.
And trees watch us come and go all the time.
Right.
We're just we're an insect to trees. I mean, they watch time pass like nothing. And
Yeah.
so it really is. It's like they just need the time. And live oaks are a slow grower. In a lot of areas, they're slow growers. I've seen some exceptions where they've grown into a old water main or something like that. So they just have this awesome source of water, and they're growing much faster than the rest of them. I
Yeah.
thought especially like in Dallas, I thought it was funny. They had some of the old water mains that were running through that area were before they were even steel. So they had, I'm guessing it was like a terracotta style pipe. And
Just
so,
leaking water.
yeah, trees love them. They'll just grow right through the side of it. And then they've got a siphon to the water system. So
Yeah.
they're loving life right there.
Yeah, it's funny how, when you see some live oaks planted in places where the water table is nowhere near their root system, that they really struggle. But I can show you trees in New Orleans and Baton Rouge that are 5 foot in diameter, perfectly healthy, and are literally surrounded by concrete in every direction,
Mm-hmm.
because
We
their
had
roots are literally sitting in water the whole time, 24/7.
And what's funny is you'll put the exact same tree in a situation like that and it'll die. That tree just adapted to its situation. It just loved it.
Right.
So we used to joke about a tree we had at one of our parks. It originally was in a most all the parks in downtown Dallas were they were originally a parking lot.
Mhm.
So this tree was in the middle of a parking lot and they were asphalting all the way up to the base of that tree. There
Mhm.
was a concrete pole stuck through the roots of it, and that tree grew just fine. It
Mhm.
just found a way. No other tree was probably going to grow there, and that tree just found a way to survive. And of course,
Yeah.
it got all that got pulled back, and it's living its best life now. But it's like that tree grew in the middle of a parking lot, and it didn't
Yeah.
have any issues.
And really what we might see as a problem with watershed, um, that's actually, they need a ton of water. So trying to focus water towards them and leave it there versus, I think often in water management, we're trying to get it completely out of the area. Like water
Mhm.
hits the ground, it hits the drain, and we got to get it, you know, off to some lake or some reservoir or something. But the trees would rather that water just stay local and never leave.
And
Um,
they do a really great job of filtering water too, which nobody ever really talks about how well the trees do at filtering that water that's coming through. Because don't get me wrong, whenever you've got these large concrete areas and you have water shedding off of them, the water's pretty bad.
mm,
And so the soil and the trees are doing a great job of filtering that before it gets into our water systems.
mm,
Um, there's also trees like post oaks that don't like water. So you've got a lot of these post oak forests that were originally there. They've been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then we plant St. Augustine and Bermuda below them and water them every day. And that's
mm,
the last thing that tree wanted. That tree was living in a prairie that got water 4 or 5 times a year. And that's the environment that it thrived in. And then we sawed around it and want it to be pretty because that's the way we see it. And it's like the classification of a weed is an unwanted plant. So if I don't
mm,
like Bermuda, Bermuda's a weed. So
right.
that tree that it wasn't there for that. That tree grew in a plains area in North Texas originally. And then we're the ones killing them by trying to make it pretty around them.
Yeah.
So
Maybe let's talk about what are the benefits that we can think about of a tree? Obviously taking away heat, but what are some of the other benefits that we can just start stacking up benefits of these
absolutely,
herbs?
I don't think there's very many downsides to any of these. Yeah, almost any tree species. I mean, we've got invasives, so we need to watch out where we're planting trees and what kind of trees that we're planting. Um, I mean, we had certain trees that we wouldn't plant because there's bird types that like that tree, and that bird poops more than the rest of them. So that bird would poop on the car. So it's like we didn't put that tree down there for that reason. But it's like overall that was a good tree for that area because live oaks, they have a very sporadic branch system. So it keeps birds of prey from getting in there and attacking the smaller birds. So they love that tree. But I mean, we're filtering air, we're filtering water, we're breaking up the ground with the roots. Everything about the trees is doing good for us. There was for larger cities, you start to get less people moving around in cars and more people moving around on foot because it's just easier to get from place to place.
Right.
So whenever you're talking about that in Texas in the summer, it's 105 degrees. So if you got a choice to walk underneath a sidewalk that's shaded with trees all the way down and a sidewalk that isn't, which one are you going to choose?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And
I
so,
know there's this like 5 mile loop around LSU lakes, and there's a couple of stretches where it's just not a tree in sight. And it's almost like you're trying to run through that as much as possible because the rest of the rest of the whole thing is just shaded by canopy of tree. You're just running under a tree canopy. And even when it's super hot, when you're under the trees, it's night and day difference between the temperature on a sidewalk under a tree versus out in the sun. I wonder if we've got any numbers on that, the heat difference.
What we were pulling was anywhere from 5 to 15 degrees difference, depending on the day, on the sidewalks, walking underneath the tree canopy. And that's all dependent upon how far the trees are apart, what type of tree and everything else. But yeah, 5 to 15 degrees was the temperature difference in that area. So that's kind of where our study was heading, is trying to figure out what sidewalks could, first of all, fit a tree. Because if you only have a 5-foot sidewalk that only passes for ADA compliance, you don't really have room to put a tree in there unless you come through and you start making changes to your roads, which don't get me wrong, I think the road should change if you can come in and bring trees to that area. A great example of that, if you ever get on just a map and look at the road systems, look at San Francisco and look at their streets and look how many trees are down there. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a great climate. It's 75 and sunny all the time so that everything grows well. But their city is just littered with trees on all their sidewalks, all their streets. And so it even looks better. It's more appealing. I love to see trees on streets, and some people find them as a nuisance, but just because they may drop fruit or pollen or something. But that was what the biggest difference was. We were trying to pick out walkways where people are going to be traveling the most, and especially foot traffic or bikes or whatever, and trying to shade those, trying to get a canopy in and making sure that not only there was a tree there, but the tree would last. If you don't have water to that tree, you got to get water there. So whether it's a truck or having a neighbor that wants to come out with a 5-gallon bucket once a week, I mean, you got to get water there. So you can't just throw them to the wind and hope for the best. Unless it's a mesquite, they do pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that live oak, it just seems to be like a super tree in our area. I'm not sure. Are there any other good species like that? It seems like that's the go-to tree around here. Are there any others similar to that?
We had a lot of luck with a Chinese elm. Chinese elms did really good. A lot of the elms do really well in Texas in general, especially with the heat. They're pretty fast growing. So that was kind of our push, was to go that direction. Not very many people like to see live oaks being planted, even though they're a great tree for Texas, because they're slower growing and they're just not the prettiest tree at the end of the day. I like how adaptive they are, even with them throwing their leaves in the spring, because it's easier to regrow in the springtime versus all the other trees that throw in the fall.
Right.
So, but if you have a mixture, you're cleaning up leaves in the fall and then you're cleaning up leaves in the spring again because you have live oaks on property. But I think that's a pretty adaptive trait that they've taken over time to be able to withstand all the temperature changes, is being able to throw leaves in the spring.
Yeah, it's crazy how, and we don't even say manage these trees. Once they get to a certain age, you just, the management almost goes down to nothing. I think once they get over 20 years old, but that's still a long time to wait for some people to think they got to wait 20 years to have a decent
Mm-hmm. And then you
Do you
drive through a neighborhood with 20-plus-year-old trees, and everybody's in ooh and ah, and look how beautiful this is. It's like, yeah, that's what happens when you plant it today and
think?
wait.
Right.
You got to
Yeah.
plant them.
Whoever, I forget what it was, is maybe the sign. I can't remember the quote. Something about the sign of greatness of a person who's planting trees that they'll never sit up under or see the
Mhm.
shade underneath them. But you really have to have long foresight to be able to kind of see that in the future. So you can kind of thank people that have been dead for 100 years for all the great trees you have.
Or at least for not cutting them down.
Right.
Thanks for not cutting that one down.
That's right.
The there was a big, I mean, our line was always 2 years. If we planted a tree, we would baby that tree for about 2 years, give or take the environment it was in. But if we were actively watering it and watching that tree, which it shouldn't be pruned in the first 2 years anyways, but we were watching that tree for 2 years. And after the 2 year mark, we would kind of teeter off of our water and see how well that tree acclimated to the natural environment, not needing subsequent water from there on. And if it could, that was most of the time they could handle it. But we did have some trees that just couldn't handle not having added water.
Right.
So we would have to either replace that tree or find a better option for that area. Because I mean, it comes down to anything. Your soil could just be wrong in that spot, and that tree is just not going to do well. So there's a lot that went into picking trees, and picking locations for trees was a huge one. I mean, something as simple as reflection off of a high rise could kill a tree. You know,
Really?
you killed plenty of landscape in Dallas. Just a reflection off a building at a certain time of day, just, I mean, almost lights it on fire. I mean, just goes down there like the magnifying glass and cooks all the landscape in that area. So it's like you keep going down, going, why are these bushes burning up? But the ones right there are just fine. Why is this happening every single year? Why is this happening? It's because the sun's bouncing off of that building right there that's just covered in glass.
Wow. That's crazy. You don't even think about that when you're planting it. You kind of
Mhm.
look at what's underground. Don't plant it on top of some type of service main or electrical grid or whatever, but you never think about the reflection of the sunlight onto this tree killing it.
The urban landscape is a whole different ball game whenever you're just talking about your environment around you is such a pain to deal with, and you got to think about all these things that you didn't have to think about before. And you
Yeah.
may not have an issue in one half of the year, but whenever the sun's coming around on its axis, it hits that building differently in that time of the year. So all of a sudden you're like, what the heck is this? This has been good for 8 months. What's going on here? It's just
Yeah.
different time of the year.
Now, when you say baby the trees, talk about so what does that mean? What does it mean to baby the tree? So what are the things you have to do during this first couple of years?
A lot of the time the soil should be fine because it's still so fresh in the ground, and usually they're going in as like a ball in a burlap tree. So
Mhm.
they've been pulled from the farm, they've been wrapped in a burlap ball, and that's how they're going in the ground. Now that burlap will degrade over time because it will just break down. And then we were using a company called Arbor Stakes. If you don't know about him, I think everyone should use Arbor Stakes or look him up. He's out of Dallas. Um,
How do you say that? It's
Arbor.
Arbor States,
Yep.
States.
Yes.
And is that a company, a local company?
Yeah, he's out of Dallas. Um, I believe his name is Chris Brown. He's the owner. Um, we've seen awesome stuff out of that, and I know he has a few contracts out with a lot of the cities around us. So it's a wooden dowel and then a top cap that goes over it to hold it down. So we'll sink those through the ball and burlap root ball,
Mhm.
and you order them in sizes depending upon the size of the tree. So of course, the longer the stake, the larger the tree.
Mhm.
Um, and we'll sink those down, and they're all biodegradable. So you don't have a stake above ground, which is always ugly and unsightly, and you're always changing tension and fighting with them, and you've got to mow around them. These are all below ground level, and you cut off the excess that didn't go below there, and then it's got a top cap to hold it in.
Mhm.
So once you cover that with mulch, I think it's 18 months. They're biodegradable in 18 months. The top cap, the dowel, everything, it just becomes part of the root ball after that time period. So
And so
in
what is this, like this is basically like a wooden spike or something that
Yep,
has
just a
fertilizer in
large
it?
wooden spike. And like I said, I doubted it until I tried it the first time and seeing crazy winds come in, and I'm like, oh, these trees, this new tree is going to get pushed over, and
Mm,
it just didn't happen. They hold in there. The root ball, since it's a wooden dowel, roots just grow into it and hold on.
mm,
And so it all just becomes one piece. I mean, we've had great luck with them, and now it's my standard. If we're planting a tree, it's getting arbor stakes.
mm. And they're called arbor. So is there like a line coming from, like a lot of times when well, maybe let's go back and say, walk us through how to plant a tree. So let's say you've got the area, everything's as good as you can possibly measure. And then you go, how old is this tree when you're planting it? It's typically the saplings have been a 2-year-old or 1-year-old or.
It's all dependent upon the area. A lot of our stuff, we had more established trees, so we were going in with a tree that kind of matches the area that it's going into. You're not always going to find a tree the same size, especially at the parks, whatever, 10, 20 years old. You're not going to find that tree somewhere on a farm very easily and for a price that anybody wants to pay.
Right.
Because trees are expensive. And so try not to lose them, because if you got to replace them, you're paying for it.
Right.
But anything from a sapling, I know there's different studies that show like some saplings work better growing versus putting in a 6-inch caliper tree. Just because they're able to get more established at a smaller size versus a tree. If you lose a 6-inch caliper tree, it hurts the pocket. And
Right.
most of them come with warranties, but say you get a 1-year or 2-year warranty and you lose the tree your 3rd year, you're just out.
Right.
A lot of the times you're making sure that whenever you're excavating your hole, you're going larger than the root ball that's going in, so that you're getting soil breakup and you're getting some air down in there, so it's got easier area to grow. If you're starting fresh, I think everybody should use a system called Silvacell, and it goes below the grade of, say, you're planting in a sidewalk area. Before the sidewalk ever gets put down, you put down these square blocks. And I know they come in various sizes, and they get filled with rock and dirt and everything else before you put the sidewalk down. And it really, instead of there just being solid dirt that can compact in that area, these cells have all these holes and pathways through it. So it makes it a lot easier for the trees and the water to move through that area and really root and get a hold of everything underneath the sidewalk, instead of having to fight through all the compacted dirt from the equipment driving over it and people and cars and everything else.
Right.
So Silvacell was another big one that it's like, if you have the opportunity to do so, that it's a fresh start in that area, that's the way to go. And it's really a cool process if you watch the videos of them installing that system.
And this is just that's not a specific brand, that's the Silvacell?
I think Silvacell is kind of the gist of how it's going in the ground, but I don't know if they have it brand named as just Silvacell, if it's just one company. But there was a lot of the newer parks that would be on the exterior of the sidewalk areas, because there was trees going in. And so, but in older areas, if you're just planting one tree, you're not ripping up all your sidewalks to do so. So you just got to live with what you got.
Yeah. How big of a parameter does that, let's say in an ideal situation and you want to plant a live oak, and this sapling is typically what, a couple years old by the time you get it?
Yeah, I would probably say at least 2 years old.
And that's what, about 3 inches in diameter at the 1 year?
No, I would say a 2-year-old could be, tiny.
Okay, yeah. Tiny.
It just depends on where the tree was growing. And so you may get a 5-year-old tree that can be a 4-inch caliper tree, or you can get a 5-year-old that's a 2-inch caliper tree. It's all just dependent upon your farm. I would say if you were going to put Silvacell down, figure out what your normal radius of that tree would be. So the canopy of that tree when that tree is fully grown, and I would make sure that Silvacell is at least that far, so that you have as much ground structure as you do height and width of that tree, so it has more to grab onto.
Yeah. Okay, so then, all right, so then you got it in the ground, and let's say you've got all these tree spikes and this Silvacells and everything going around. What do you do? And are you like tying it off with the little strands or ropes or whatever for the first few years? Are you maintaining that, or is it just going in the ground?
So with the arbor stakes, there's no more of the straps and everything above ground, the unsightly look and everything else that's going on. The arbor stakes are handling that. They're taking that process and doing it below ground level.
No way. I've got to
So
see one of
that's what I love about them, is that you no longer having to deal with the ugliness of T-posts and ratchet straps holding
Yes.
trees up. And then the people that never come back and never remove it, so the tree grows around whatever you left on it for 5 years straight. But they're so once you get past that point, you got your tree in the dirt. We were big about most of the winter. You don't have to worry about it that much. Well, in Texas, you don't have to worry about it that much for watering. I would make sure that you're getting it at least 2 or 3 times a month. And then making sure that you're not, of course, getting sprinkler irrigation on it during a freeze so that you aren't cracking the center line of these trees. But in the summer times, I would say for us, it was like late May, early June, we would start doing 2 times a week watering. And so we'd send out a water truck and hit the roots and really give them a soak 2 times a week, not just kind of a hit, and not watering at the base of the tree, watering the width of that tree. So as far out as that canopy is, you want to get that water line out there. That's where the tree's naturally going to get its water. So when the water sheds off of that tree and falls to the ground, that's where it's naturally going to have its intake line, because that's where how far out that tree's natural roots are going to try to grow. As wide as that tree is, they're going to grow just as far, because it's trying to hold that tree up from the wind. So it's going to keep going sideways and down. So you pretty much have a tree below that tree.
Yeah. Whatever's above ground is kind of essentially below ground.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
You pretty much have the baseline of that tree below it. So, and that's why people, it's like whenever you plant something in a sidewalk, you lose a lot of that because it's growing outwards under concrete. So you're not getting water to that exterior. So you really have to soak the center line of that tree, which isn't the best for it, but it's what you got. So you just got to get water to it. So we're trying 2 times a week minimum to get a good soak on these trees. And we were running into the issue of just how many trees we had planted. I think we had like 500 trees that were under 2 years old that we were having to water 2 times a week.
Wow.
So luckily we had a good system with the water truck, and the guy knew where all the trees were. We walked through the map every couple of months to make sure there wasn't any updates. We had water keys so that we can hook up to the fire hydrants and fill the trucks up quickly, and really we had a system down, so it was working pretty well there.
Yeah.
To get around and get all these trees.
Is there any type of mulch ring you want to put around it on day one, and how thick is that? And then do you want to maintain this throughout its first few years?
Mulch is good because you're protecting the root layer at the base of that tree from sun exposure. So it's keeping the heat level down at the root so it can actually soak up more water and you don't have as much transpiration. But grass is as good as it looks. It's always kind of the alternative of that. If you're planting something above that tree, it's taking the water that normally that tree would be taking up. So you got the center line of that tree is working in both ways. So it's taking water from the ground and going up the trunk and then out and then back down. So it's going in both directions. Whenever people really think that, a lot of people think that it's the leaves are taking it in from the sides and then sending everything down. Really, it's flowing from the ground up to the top of the tree. So the tree's basically got a piping system that it's sending it from the ground all the way to the tip and then back down.
Yeah.
So it's moving water through its cells that way. It's crazy how it works.
Yeah. So I mean, a tree, especially I would imagine the leaves, I wonder what the water content of those things, because you basically have to keep them hydrated. And it's not like it's grabbing, or does it grab any moisture out of the air, or how does that, is it all coming from the root system?
It's most all coming from the root system. Of course, there's going to be a little bit that you're pulling from the leaf level, but it's almost nothing. And so that's why you'll see it's like it's even if it hasn't rained in a long time, if the soil is staying wet at the bottom of that tree, you won't see any wilting because it's pumping the groundwater up to those leaves. The leaves aren't pumping the groundwater down or pumping water down to the roots. And so everything's going uphill. So even if you aren't getting any foliage coverage for water, you're getting coverage from the root zone.
Yeah. Now, what was the name of that organization? You said it was what was it? Tree, not society, it was a tree
The
university.
Texas Trees Foundation.
Texas Trees Foundation. Are
Mhm.
you connected with those guys over there?
We had a good bit of work going on with the study that we were doing for the heat island effects in Dallas. Um, I also have a cousin over at Southern Botanical, and they do some amazing stuff with trees too, and that's local for us.
Mhm.
They may have some branching out stuff, but Southern Botanical does a lot of crazy good work in Dallas area. Um, so
Yeah.
they were helping us a lot in the park systems and making sure that the trees were taken care of there. But the urban stuff, where we're talking about sidewalks and the public space, we did most of that work with the Texas Trees Foundation.
Yeah, we may have to get one of those guys on here as well. That might make a
Absolutely.
good guest. How has it already been 33 minutes? I feel like we started like 6 seconds ago.
I told you trees are the easy one.
That's when you keep going about. All right, so now we're past the 2-year mark. What does it look like after 2 years? What has it done? So at this point, the tree's established. What are we talking about? A 2-inch tree at this point?
I'm
3-inch?
hoping that it depends. If you do saplings in the ground, yeah, you're talking about a 2-inch tree. And whenever we're talking about parks and rec, especially if you're in a park, your biggest threat to anything is first of all mowers. A lot of
Mhm.
those guys are just blowing and going, and so if there's just something in their way and they're not paying attention, that sapling becomes mulch.
Oh yeah,
Um, and so they'll smoke it unless you've got it flagged, blocked, painted orange, a cone over it. I mean, anything possible. I swear these guys wear blinders when they're mowing sometimes, and they'll
yeah,
just take them out.
yeah.
So that's one of the biggest threats. The secondary one is always dog urine. You take a
Really,
little tree like that and just have a dog pee on it 20 times a day, and it's never going to make it. It's just going to burn that tree to death.
really.
So you got to get that tree through that little phase
Yeah,
before you're really not having to worry about it getting ran over, stepped on, mowed. It's really in like the danger zone. So
yeah,
you want to have it in an area that's almost blocked off. So if it's just in the middle of a field, a good talk with the guys going, don't hit the new trees. Stay away from the new trees. Make sure you're
yeah.
paying attention to what you're mowing, because not everything is a weed.
Right,
Sometimes it does. You get them in the tall grass and you quit noticing it. It's something that's only whatever 10 inches tall and the grass is 8 inches tall. You didn't see it.
right.
And so
Well,
we
I guess
lost a lot of saplings to mow.
yeah, I guess this is where, mulching around them can be
Mhm.
a deterrent or just a marker, if anything else, that hey, there's a tree in the middle of this thing that we're trying to.
And I enjoy tree rings. I think tree rings look good, but I think tree rings are a short-term thing. I've seen a lot of trees that they don't get removed and they either just degrade, because most all the normal tree rings are metal, so they usually just rust out, or
Mhm.
you'll get a tree ring that gets stuck into the root ball. And then you're having to carve into the tree to try to get this ring back out of there, or you just let the tree have it.
Right,
Um, the tree doesn't really care. It can add wounds to the tree, which then invite disease into the tree. But rust is good for the grass. It's good for the tree. Everything likes iron. So that aspect isn't bad, but most of the time it's introducing a wound into that tree, which then gives it that avenue for disease. Same
is
with
there
trees rubbing on each other. If trees are rubbing branches against each other, same thing. It's like you rubbing your arms together all day long. You'll eventually create a wound, and then that
yeah.
wound can get infected.
All right, so let's talk about tree wounds then.
Mhm.
What is a healthy tree? Has obviously the wood in the middle that we're familiar with, but then they've got something between the exterior bark, or how important is that bark to keep intact? Kind of like a skin, I would guess.
Oh, it's absolutely crucial. That exterior block between the interior and the exterior of the tree. The And it's cool to see how trees will do it. And it's such a slow pace that we don't notice it until it's kind of really far along. But
Mhm.
say a tree does have a disease out on a leader branch that's way out there, and the tree notices it, knows that there's something going on, it will actually start closing that branch off. So
Oh
you'll
no.
see at the base of that branch, you'll see it start curling up and rolling in, and it will start closing that branch off until it falls. And it's healing itself. It's taken over, and it's like, yeah, we need to get rid of this piece. I mean, in the aspect of it's like me, if I get a cut on my arm, I'm like, well, this isn't going to turn out well. So let's
Yeah.
just get rid of this arm here.
Oh
And
my
it's what the
goodness.
tree's doing. It's protecting itself by blocking off that branch, and it will eventually drop it.
Yeah.
Which then you have to, and that's when, if you're watching your trees and doing tree care properly, you'll see that there is a branch with a disease. Let's get it off of that tree. Let's cut it off.
Now, if you do cut a branch, is there anything you do to the end? You know, the cut part, or you let the tree kind of heal itself, or is there something you put on it?
So there's some paints out there that are designed for that to put on the end of that branch after you cut it. But I believe it's supposed to be done like immediately. So if you
Mhm.
cut that tree and then you come back in 2 weeks to paint over that branch, the damage is already done. Whatever's going to happen is already going to happen.
Mm.
So it's best to, if you cut that tree, hit it within 24 hours
I
and
see.
block off that branch and really protect it from all the other disease and just other bugs and everything from getting in. And so you want to cut it and then go ahead and paint it off. Um, and you'll see a lot of people where they'll paint it a certain color so it's visible to say, hey, this tree needs to be watched because we just made a cut on it. So let's make sure it doesn't change from here.
Right. Now, after, let's just say, going out to the 20-year mark, how often do you visit this tree? Is it like every 5 years, or I guess you got to still continue the watering program, or once you get it past that first stage, are you no longer having to water it?
Yeah, I don't believe a tree at that age needs water unless unless you're in a really dry zone. If that tree is getting water multiple times a year from normal, just everyday rain,
Mhm.
I think it's made it 20 years. It's pretty established. Your tree care programs, I think they're checking on them about every 2 years, every other year, depending on how busy that program is. But
Mm.
you're just looking for widow makers, branches that are hanging in trees, a limb, same thing that's diseased and it's trying to kick off. You're just doing maintenance now. You're checking those branches and making sure everything's right. You may do a pruning, but you don't want to prune more than 5% of a tree's overall branch structure because then you're going to stress that tree. So
Mm.
you want to do it softly. You want to keep that tree in good health without stressing it out, especially a 20-year-old tree. It's like it's big and established and you don't want to change that up very much. But yeah, I think it's every other year, every third year you really do a go around and do your audit. You check on all your big trees and make sure they're all good.
Yeah. Now, you hear a lot of people say they're arborists. What does that mean? Where do you get this certification from? What are the different levels?
That I'm not the expert there. I pick stuff up as I go.
Right.
I know there's certifications and there's guys that are just, I mean, absolute wizards when it comes to tree care. Like I said, my
Mhm.
cousin that works for Southern Botanical, he's an absolute wizard when it comes to tree care.
Mhm.
Like I said, I pick stuff up as I go and I try to listen to the experts whenever they're talking and try to do more listening than whenever it comes to those kind of things. But I know there's certain certifications that you can get in those categories to prove that you're an expert in that field. And I think, what is it, like we talked about last time, 10,000 hours makes you a master of something.
Right. Right.
I know those guys spend a lot of time. I mean, it's their day to day making sure that the trees are taken care of. And I mean, it's just like everything else in nature. They're all just trying to die on you. You're trying to bring them back to life.
Right. Now, I'm assuming that this is a very common college degree that's offered in a lot of universities, an arborist degree or something. I
Yeah, I'm
wonder
trying
what,
to. Yeah, it's ISA. That's what I was thinking of, trying to figure out exactly what it was.
what does that mean?
Certified Arborist ISA.
Certified arborist?
Hmm. That's when I was trying to remember what the certification was called. And a lot of the times, whenever you see them, it's like everybody else, they'll have it, and their title is ISA certified.
Hmm.
Um, our big help for around here was like Texas A&M has a lot of really good people whenever it comes to forestry, and they'll travel around the state. So if you get in contact with a lot of your local colleges, they usually have somebody on staff that is a tree care person. And so if you know that you have these big established trees, you can have them come out and check everything out for you. So Texas A&M was a big one for us to come out and look at our trees and our overall tree plan and say, hey, does this look good or does this look bad? And they'll kind of yay or nay it or give their insights.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that I think everybody should have at least access to kind of help guide them along. Otherwise, they're going to be making a ton of mistakes that they won't even realize.
Mhm.
And this is not. Maybe help us out with the pricing. Let's just say you want to plant 500 trees. What's the actual price tag on, all these different phases? So what is a sapling cost of, let's just say, a live oak?
It's
I know it varies, but especially with today's
yeah,
dollar.
I'm trying to think of what our general like rough about would be. I know we were buying 3-inch caliper trees, and before planting, they were like $500 to $800, depending on the tree. And we were
And how
getting
old were these? These
what was
were
that?
what? How old were these trees at this point when you're buying?
Those would
This is
probably
in
be
the
4 or 5 year old trees,
okay, and this is
depending
the
upon the farm.
they typically plant them. These are in the ground, and then they take them out the ground, wrap a burlap sack around them, and that's how they're delivered to you.
Yeah, and there were some of them that if they were farm grown or if they were brought in from other farms, usually if they're brought in from other farms, they'll keep them in the larger pots just on site, and they'll also do ball and burlap and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But I know when like a 6-inch caliper tree with the person we were using, Fan and Tree Farms in North Texas, they were a 6-inch for us was like 1250 for the tree,
Mhm.
and then you have to include time and labor, of course, for them planting the tree. We had a great relationship with Dallas Parks and Rec, so Dallas Parks and Rec was helping us with the planting as long as we were buying the tree.
Mm.
But I want to say we were setting aside funds for 500 trees in urban, like in downtown Dallas, to plant in the sidewalk areas, and we were setting around, I don't know, about $500,000 for buying the trees, and then of course there's the funds of taking out sidewalks and changing irrigation and water and everything else is everything up and above.
Yeah.
So it's a large expenditure whenever you're talking about planting that much in an urban landscape. If you're going to be planting in a field, of course your price is going to go down drastically for your
Right.
labor, but your trees are basically going to be the same price.
Yeah. And so the tree itself, you're going to be a couple hundred, well, under 500, I would say, or around 500 for something like that. And that's just what you say about the size of your thumb. These are younger trees.
Yeah, they're a lot younger trees.
Mm.
Um, for me, I really tried to stay between that 2.5 inch to that 4-inch caliper range because it's
Mm.
a tree that's big enough that it's noticeable that you came in and you planted trees, and it's a tree that's still small enough that it has that time to establish without being it high up in the wind zone, or a tree that's just it's at more of a risk because it is a larger tree. I know we lost a humongous bald cypress at one of our parks because it was a transplant across the park. So it was either transplanted or lose it. So they gave it a chance to transplant, and it lasted 2 years before it started going downhill, and it just had a bad summer.
Yeah.
But I mean, it always sucks to lose a tree like that, especially a transplant from the same area. But I mean, that's always an option too. If you have an area that you know they're going to be removing these trees and you have the ability to, you can bring a tree spade in and take those trees out. So you're lowering that upfront cost of the trees by just taking them from another region with a tree spade.
Right. Now, I noticed there's a difference between if you plant it too small, then it's just going to get run over. If it's too big, it just won't be able to reestablish itself and recover from, moving it from one location to the other. So what was that sweet spot again? How old is that tree and how big around is it?
I like to stay between 2.5 to the 4-inch caliper range. So the measurement of that,
Mhm.
what they call the bust of the tree. And so like for me, that was what our wind zone. So we, of course, in between those buildings is like wind alleys. It's where it's cutting through there really fast.
Mhm.
And so a tree that isn't as high up in the air is going to catch less wind. The
Right.
arbor stakes, of course, are helping you with that to keep that tree set in place. But the larger the tree, the more abuse it's going to take at that point in time. And the amount of root structure you're having to take off of a larger tree is much greater than that tree that doesn't even have that root structure yet. So you're
Right.
not cutting through half of the roots to get it out, because a
Yeah.
tree spade can only go so wide, and then you only got so much of an area to plant in a sidewalk. So
Right.
say it's a 8 by 10 or a 10 by 10, which is a huge hole for a tree in downtown Dallas. Most of ours were like 2 by 2 or 4 by 4, like small. So it was like
Right.
we were having to make stuff fit. We were squeezing
Right.
stuff into places.
Right.
Just so we didn't have a little, like you said, a sapling in that spot for every dog in that area to compete on and kill in 2 weeks, whenever it took me time and planning to get it in there.
Yeah. Is there anything to deter the dogs from urinating on it? Because it seems like every dog, and the thing is, once one dog pees on it, every dog that passed, they're like remarking it or something, claiming
There
territory.
absolutely is with the smaller variations of trees that not like a live oak that's just going to get huge over time, which you can come back through and remove this, but there'll be a lot of changes that happen. We did raised trees planters. And so if we knew that it was going to be a smaller tree in that area, we'd put it on. I had a guy that would come down and custom make me boxes on top of an existing tree well. He would set that box there. And so it not only had the amount of dirt that was in the box, it had the dirt that was originally below it for a root structure. And so if I knew this was an area right outside of an apartment building or right outside of condos, that every person in that building was walking out with their dog, and that dog's going to hit the first thing it sees. So you can either put a magnet there for a rock, a fake post, something there to get that dog's attention before he gets to your tree, or you plant the tree high enough that he can't pee on it. He'll just pee on the box.
Yeah.
And so we tried that, and it worked out really well for us. I laughed the day we were putting in the boxes. A lady walked by with her Great Dane, and he peed smooth over the top of the box into it. And I was like, well, there's the outlier, but
the Great Danes, they're just taller.
Didn't account for the horse that lady was walking down the street that day.
Right.
But most of the dogs they're not going to pee inside of there.
Yeah.
But we were big on putting magnet spots to try to get dogs to pee in other locations. So putting artificial turf on street corners. Because I mean, some of the condos and stuff, they were a good ways from a park or a grassy area. So we were trying to give them somewhere to take their dog to use the restroom because he's got to go. And he's been pent up all day long. He doesn't want to walk another mile after he gets out of the house to use the restroom.
Yeah.
So we were trying to make sure that we were stationing spots for dog relief zones.
Right. Now, how tall are these boxes off the I guess the surface? Are we talking like 12 inches?
About 24 inches was our average box
height.
Yep.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah, that is, most dogs have to hop up there. And how big around were they?
It was always dependent upon the box that was already in the grounds or a tree well that was there. We had some smaller ones to where, of course, we were 24 inches tall, but we would bevel upwards. So say it was only a 4x4 at the bottom, we could open it up to a 5x5 at the top by just increasing the top size. So it bevel downwards. But we had some other tree wells that were 8 feet by 8 feet. And so we have a much bigger box there. And then of course you got more dirt to get down for that tree to really establish itself. And especially in the windy zones, I mean, you get a lot of trees that if you don't have them staked down or established correctly, they grow like this. And so you'll have a whole line of trees that's always been like this because they're just getting blown over all year long.
Right. And do you make these out of treated wood, or do you just make it out of something that's naturally going to rot and you just leave it there?
We were doing steel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we were having a guy that he would come down, give us or get his measurements, and he would come and build them on spot for us. He was local and he did great work. He was a master welder. And they were pretty. They were made out of tin mostly, and then we do some out of high tensile steel. And then we would either acid wash the outside or just let them do their thing, and they would have a nice like urban look to them, nice rust patina look to them. And so that was just the way we left them. And so there was less maintenance on that side of them. And that steel, it's 1/4 inch thick. It's almost never going to rot away.
Yeah. Man, I think we just barely scratched the tip of the iceberg here that I'm noticing. And the thing is, I used to cut trees because we had bucket trucks as the electricians that would work for the city, and they would always hire us when they got swamped to just help them trim the trees. And I think I've learned more in the last 52 minutes than I have cutting trees, not really knowing the science behind it. Yeah, we may have to make this a regular visit and topic on this.
Trees are crazy, and they're crazy important. So it's like everybody needs to start thinking about cutting less of them and planting more of them.
Right. And there's this big talk about carbon capture and how do we capture more carbon out of the atmosphere. I'm like, the tree does this exact thing for us.
One of the coolest apps that we had was it was by Planet Geo,
Uh,
and it was called Tree Plotter. And so it not only had geolocations of every tree that we had in downtown Dallas, which we had 7,400 located at before I left. Yeah, I think it was around 7,400. And so we had locations on those trees and types and size and status of those trees. But that was a really cool app because you could input all that information and then you could share that with anyone. So if
Yeah.
any other city's doing an audit or wants to see like what's going on in your townhouse, your tree care program going, you could just share that information and it's all built into the app.
And what was the name of that app?
I think it was called Tree Plotter, but the people who were servicing it for us was Planet Geo.
Tree Plotter and Planet Geo.
Mm-hmm.
Plotter and Planet Geo.
So they were really a big help for us because it was a subscription base. So we used them year over year, and we would trade off information with like Texas Trees and Dallas Parks and Rec and the utilities, and really so we could all see what was going on and kind of like, hey, this line of tree is due for service. Hey, look, everything that's in the red is time for a prune. Hey, these trees are diseased. This tree's dead, and it would flag everything on that system. You could just share it. So if they ever needed the information, they could just click on it and be like, oh, everything in red needs to be either removed or a new tree planted because it's either dead or missing.
I see.
So yeah, it was an awesome app.
And that was the Planet Go?
Yeah, the Planet Geo with the Tree Plotter.
Yeah. All right. So what are some resources that you would recommend for somebody that's kind of new to this arena, trying to, maybe up their game on urban forestry? What are some kind of maybe resources we can point them in the right direction? Or maybe just, aside from going to your local university that might have something.
Mm-hmm. Really get in with the cities, get in with your inner cities, figure out who is maintaining in those areas. I know Dallas went from Dallas Parks and Rec taking care of their trees to where now they're under like water utilities, I think is who they got branched under. And so they had a wider range whenever it came to that. So figure out who is really over tree care in your area and sit in with them, ask them questions, find out whoever's run that program, get their email and start talking to them about what's going on and how they're handling it and what their tree camp program looks like. They may not even have one. They may just be cutting the ones that fall in the street, which is probably the case for a lot of people. Because it's kind of one of those things where it's not an immediate necessity, and like especially for utilities, they just come and cut the ones that are in the way. So it's like they're not really looking at tree care; they're looking at tree maintenance or tree problems. But really, it's find out who's in your city, figure out what they're doing and what the issues are around you. I'm jealous of the cities like North Carolina and South Carolina where they just have these huge, beautiful trees everywhere. That of course the environment's a little bit better.
Yeah, that's kind of how we are right here. We live in some little urban tree paradise right outside of LSU campus. If you haven't been to LSU campus to look at the oak trees, I've walked around them so much. It's crazy how massive these things are and how much they add to if you deleted them from the campus, it would just be terrible.
Yeah, it'd be awful. Nobody wants to see that. They want to see more of them.
That's right, more of them. All right, well, that pretty much wrapped up that show. I thought we would be running out of stuff to talk about on this. We've really scratched the surface here, so we're going to come back to this topic and with many more around all things facilities maintenance. And so I'm trying to think where we'll go with the next topic. Any suggestions? I know we had talked about field maintenance, and that's something you do regularly. So maybe that's a topic we can touch on with you.
Yeah, we can get. And I mean, that's what the tree side is one thing, and then like whatever you get into the agronomy side, we're in the whole different ball field. No pun intended.
Oh yeah.
We'll catch up behind the scenes and figure out what the next best thing is, or see what everybody wants to hear and jump into it.
That's it. We'll work the comment section. Leave in the comments of topics that you want to hear about, or if we want to expand on topics like urban forestry or field maintenance or any of that kind of stuff, and we'll just give them what they want. But well, thank you so much for your time this morning, Garrett, and hopefully you'll have a great Monday without too much. Let's see, what are you looking for? You're hoping to aerate the soil as soon as
Yeah, we got done with our aeration, but our sand delivery was coming in this week, right about the same time as the rain. So I think we're gonna have to hold off on doing a little bit of top dressing on campus. So we'll get to it when it stops flushing us out.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time. We'll catch up later this week and do another great show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Take care, Garrett. Bye. All right. That was our first guest for the facilities maintenance component of the Daily Parks and Rec Show. I think we are on to something huge here. I think creating content around stuff that's just very practical, that's used every day, that we can share tons of wisdom. And this wisdom goes super deep when you're studying things like field maintenance, urban forestry, and the list goes on and on. So going to be a great show. So we're going to do this every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, 10:45 a.m. Eastern, and bring some sort of wisdom around maintaining facilities in parks and recreation, just like urban forestry. All right, so I'm Craig LeBlanc, the doorman, your daily host of the Daily Parks and Rec Show, and we will have another guest coming up here in about 12 minutes to go over all things rec sports. So looking forward to seeing y'all here in a few minutes. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye. The future of parks and recreation is here, and it starts with you. Welcome back to the Daily Parks and Recreation Show, where we bring you the latest insights, trends, and conversations shaping the world of parks and recreation. Today, we're diving into something that's shaping the future of our industry, Young Professional Networks, or YPN. If you love your job and love the parks and recreation community and are looking to connect with the next generation of leaders, this episode is for you. YPN is where driven, passionate professionals come together to connect, grow, and make a real impact. It's not just about networking, it's about building the future of our communities. Why join YPN? Career growth and mentorship. Learn from the best in the industry. Innovative ideas and collaboration. Be part of the next big movement. Leadership development. Take charge, make decisions, and create change. Whether you're just starting out or looking to take your career to the next level, YPN is your gateway to success. From exclusive networking opportunities to cutting-edge industry insights, this is where you build your legacy. Because the future of parks and recreation starts with you.